Hello and welcome everybody to my new channel where I will be breaking down my picks and predictions for all the UFC events coming up. Starting off with a banger here, UFC 323 in Las Vegas, Nevada at T-Mobile Arena. Kicking us off is Muhammad Naimov versus Myron Santos. Santos, Ultimate Fighter champion last year, beat Khan Offley via vicious knockout. One of the nastier knockouts in the championships of the the Ultimate Fighter finales, and as long as I can remember for sure. And since then, 2-0 in the UFC, coming off of a nice unanimous decision win against Sadiq Yusuf. He'll be taking on Muhammad Naimov. Naimov is 5-1 in the UFC. Only loss coming to Felipe Lima, who is a certified killer in the division. Yes, he's coming off a loss to Talbot, but I do believe that Talbot is the next up-and-coming prospect at 145 pounds. I really do think, obviously Barcelos checked his wrestling and gave him a quote-unquote fraud check, but, I still think he's a great fighter, has tons of power, and, we'll be going deeper into Talbot later in the card when we break down his fight against Henry Cejudo. But, Naimov 5-1 in the UFC now. Has wins over Nathaniel Wood. They share a win over Khan Offley, and his last fight was a unanimous decision win over Bogdan Grad. That fight was a little interesting. I know there's a lot of questions surrounding Naimov's performance in that fight. Some people were very unimpressed, felt like, that was a robbery, felt like Grad made it a lot closer than the judges seemed to think. So, this will be interesting. Santos definitely has a big power advantage here in this fight. He has a finish win over Offley, something Naimov couldn't do. Naimov is definitely the type of guy who is a heavy wrestler, grappler. Usually that's what he uses to win fights. Trains at elevation with Corey Sandhagen out of Denver. So, it'll be interesting. I know that last fight didn't look like he had the greatest gas tank, but he is still a great grappler. Saying the odds here are floating around minus 250 for Santos. I reckon Santos could could potentially get a knockout win in this fight. Naimov is a tricky customer though. Obviously, 5-1 in the UFC. Only loss is a decision to Felipe Lima, who was on a nasty run before losing his last bout to Talbot. But I'm going to lean Santos in this fight. I could see, Naimov wrestling his way to a decision, but I do think that the power is going to be too much of a trick for Santos. So, moving on, we have Mansour Abdul Malik versus Antonio Tricoli. Abdul Malik, he's still a raw prospect right now, but, still 8-0. Obviously had that last fight against Cody Brundage overturned to a draw. I believe maybe a no contest. I don't know if it looks like they overturned it to a draw. I believe it was a clash of heads that Brundage complained about. But before that, had a KO win against Nick Klein. In the first round, he was getting wrestled pretty heavily by Nick Klein. Was getting held up against the cage, from what I remember. Can Tricoli do that to him? I'm not sure. That's definitely going to have to be his path to victory here if he wants to find a way to shake this one out on the scorecards or work this to the ground and be able to get a submission win. Definitely going to want to have a lot of forward pressure, but I just don't see that from Tricoli. He's 0-2 in the UFC now. Got knocked out by Shara Bullet, and then is coming off of a loss by submission to Trishan Gore. The only real wins Tricoli has are outside the octagon. He did date Mackenzie Dern from what I read about him earlier today. So, at least he's winning outside the octagon. That's definitely a feat in its own accord. But I don't see him picking up the win this weekend against Abdul Malik. Yes, Abdul Malik is raw. Yes, I do see him losing a fight in the near future when he gets ranked up against matched up against a better ranked opponent. But I don't think I'm going to overthink this one too much. Triccoli is going to be about 3 inches taller, but they have similar reach, about a half-inch reach advantage for Triccoli. The power is 100% on the side of Abdul Malik. So, yeah, I'm going to try not to overthink this one, and I'm going to roll with Mansur Abdul Malik to win this one by KO, probably in the first round. Moving up to the next prelim, we have Ibo Aslan versus Iwo Baranowski. Baranowski coming off of a 20-second knockout win against Muhammad Ali on the Contender Series. That's always funny to say. Was a nasty KO. I think he was close to like a 3-1 underdog. Ali was a pretty big favorite in that fight. And yeah, Baranowski shut his lights out in 20 seconds. Had one of the more impressive wins on the Contender Series from this past season. So I've definitely been excited for his debut. He's taken on Ibo Aslan, who is, I believe, 2-2 now in the UFC, but he is 0-2 in his last 2 fights, coming off of a submission loss to Ion Cutelaba and a decision loss to Billy Elikana. In that last fight against Billy, he really struggled just getting his offense going. He seemed to be fighting off the back foot a lot. A lot of teeps, a lot of fakes. Just didn't want to show the good power that we know he has. I mean, his knockout win over Rafael Cerqueira it's a pretty nasty KO, but he just hasn't showed that. That was a year and a month ago. Since then, he's dropped 2 fights in the UFC. If he comes out and fights the way he fought against Billy Elikana in his fight this weekend against Baranowski, I feel like Baranowski will be able to walk him down. He's the type of guy who wants to fight on his front foot a lot, wants to get you backed up against the cage, wants to throw a lot of power shots, and obviously, from what we've seen so far, the power is pretty nasty. So, Tapology community is siding pretty heavily with Baranowski's side, 82%, and it looks like a lot of people are picking him by KO. I think I'm going to agree with the public here. Baranowski is looking like he's floating at a -210 favorite. So, yeah, I do like Baranowski on the money line. I feel like he'll be a good parlay piece. I think he's going to pop out and really impress in his UFC debut this weekend. I do think that I like the KO prop as well. We haven't seen Aslan get KO'd in the UFC, but certainly leaves his chin out there at times, especially in the open exchanges. If he's trying to be one of those guys who's on the front foot running towards Baranowski, he could get countered the same way that Ali got countered in that Contender Series fight. So, yeah, Aslan likes to keep his chin in the air. It should be interesting. Definitely both guys have a lot of power, respectable finishers, but I'm going to lean with the, younger, undefeated prospect out of Poland. In this one, I'll take Baranowski by KO. Moving on, we got Edson Barboza versus Jalen Turner. This is an interesting one for sure. Jalen Turner sort of had a phony retirement about 9 months ago after he got submitted by Ignacio Bahamondes. I know a lot of people raising concerns about that. People just thought it was weird, a guy would hang it up, say he's retiring from the sport, and then, less than a year later, he's coming back to fight a guy who's, been a killer in the sport for 2 decades now in Edson Barboza. But, tail of the tape doesn't really show the whole story for Jalen Turner. Obviously 1-4 in his last 5. But 5 fights ago, had a close fight with Mateus Gamrot that a lot of people think he won. And then after that, a really close fight with Dan Hooker that a lot of people think he won. So I rewatched that fight with Hooker. I think I personally would have given that to Turner. He just looked better in that fight. It seemed like he did more damage than Hooker, which is rare. It's hard to out-damage Daniel Hooker. Dan's the hangman at the end of the day, and that was pretty impressive. But obviously, his one win was that vicious knockout over Bobby Green. We've all seen the MMA Guru clip where, he's saying Bobby's dead because Bobby was indeed dead. He took about 20 excess shots after the KO. Terrible. I think that was Herb Dean. I think Herb Dean got him killed in that fight. But, should have had the knockout win against Moicano. It was tough. He walked away instead of following up. Tried to have a cool walk-off KO. He got clowned for that a lot. But, he did put Moicano down pretty hard. Moicano obviously bounced back, got the ground and pound victory. You know, you can never rule Moicano out of the fight. You know, you can't afford to lose. Money Moik. But, and then, you know, obviously the last fight that we talked about, Baja Mondays did submit him. I think he was pretty broken going into that fight for sure, especially after the run that he'd been on. I do think he's a better fighter than, you know, the tail of the tape puts it out for him. And I think he's going to be able to show that this weekend. Barboza, he's coming off of a unanimous decision loss to Jakar Close. Was the fight closer than a unanimous decision? Probably. I know some people were complaining about that on Twitter after the fight. And then obviously a year and a half ago had that decision loss to Lerone Murphy where I'm pretty sure he lost every round. But before that, had a win over Sadiq Youssef and a knockout win over Billy Quarantillo. You know, Barboza's going to be 40 in 2 months, a little less than 2 months now. And he just didn't look like he had the spark in his last fight against Barboza. You know, obviously, guy with that much experience, he's always got an opportunity, you know, and a chance in there in the octagon to impress. But I think Turner's going to come out really hungry in this fight. Turner is only 30 years old at the end of the day, so he's still pretty young in the sport. You know, 14-9, not a great record, but like I said, you know, tail of the tape doesn't really show it. He arguably could have been 4-1 in his last 5 fights, but he went 1-4, and that's just the name of the game. Like, that's the business. So, you know, I'm happy to see Turner bouncing back. Definitely was frustrated with him in his last fight because just kind of looked like he gave up against Baja Mondays, which was definitely frustrating. But yeah, I'm gonna lean with Turner here. I know I've been taking a lot of KOs early in the card, but I could see Turner getting a KO here too. You know, I mean he's massive for 155 pounds, 6'3", 75-inch reach, which actually is only a half-inch reach advantage over Edson Barboza, but he's gonna have about 4 inches of height on him. And yeah, I could just see Turner getting a KO here on the feet, especially. You know, we don't really know how Barboza is. Chin is at this age, but, you know, Chin is usually one of the first things to go. And, you know, coming up on 40 years old, going against a young, hungry buck coming off of, you know, a pretty bad losing streak, I think that Turner can shake this one out, get a pretty fancy knockout victory. I think potentially win himself a performance bonus with a nasty KO this weekend and bounce back in the UFC. And yeah, I'll be rooting for Jalen Turner. I do like him. His fights are fun, even the fights that he loses. So yeah, it'll be interesting, but I'm definitely going to lean with the Turner KO here. Moving on to the next fight, we got Marvin Vettori versus Bruno Ferreira. This is an interesting one. Vettori's another guy that's on a horrible losing streak right now, 1-4 in his last 5, 0-3 in his last 3. He's going to be taking on a young killer in Bruno the Hulk. Bruno is, you know, one of my favorite fighters in the UFC. One of my favorite finishes that I can remember is that spinning elbow KO over Dustin Stoltzfus. He actually landed 2 spinning elbows in the same fight. I don't know how he didn't put him out with the first one, but the second one got the job done. He's a killer, you know. He's going out there. He's looking to finish the fight every time he is in the octagon. He's 4-1 in his last 5 with 2 knockouts and 2 submissions. You know, had a short notice armbar submission over Jackson McVeigh 4 months ago, and before that he subbed Armin Petrosian with the same armbar. But yeah, he'll be taking on Vettori, who's sort of a notorious point fighter. You know, he hasn't impressed me at all recently. Takedown defense is alright, so I don't know if Ferreira is going to be pushing to get a takedown in this fight. He's definitely going to be a forward pressure fighter. You know, he always fights with forward pressure. He doesn't like to move backwards unless he has a size advantage, and I feel like that's what really burned him with the Abus Magomedov fight, is he was fighting off of his back foot for a lot of that fight. So, you know, that was tough for him, but, you know, obviously bounced back with 2 nice submission victories after that loss. Vettori, he just, like I said, he just hasn't impressed me recently. Went back and rewatched that fight with Brendan Allen. It wasn't great. You know, say what you will about Brandon Allen. Yes, he's coming off a great win against RDR, where, you know, he essentially made RDR quit on the stool. But questionable, very, very questionable fight IQ at times. And so, yeah, it's going to be interesting. I don't know what Vettori's got left in the tank. Vettori's the younger fighter in this fight, but he's been in the UFC for so long. and he's just on a terrible run right now. I know he has been going around saying he feels like he has to win this week to keep his job in the UFC. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I don't know if they'll cut him. I mean, yeah, 0 for 4 in your last 4 fights is really tough, but he has been fighting some dogs recently. You know, Cannonier, Dvalishvili, and and Brendan Allen. So, you know, 3 ranked fighters in his last 3 losses, stepping outside of the rankings here, trying to get a big win to boost his name again. But I just don't see it happening. Bruno is a killer. I'm gonna reckon Bruno wins this one by finish. I'm not going to lean into the KO or the submission prop. I'll probably take a double chance in this fight, just because, obviously, last 4 wins, 2 of them are by submission, 2 of them are by KO. He's got tons of power, but, if he chooses that he wants to take this fight to the ground, if he wants to, try to get another armbar, 3 armbars in a row, I don't know if that's ever been done before. I'm sure it has. I mean, Walter Walker's won 4 straight fights by heel hook, but he'll maybe want to go for a 4th or a 3rd straight armbar. I think he's got a big power advantage. I think he could win this fight on the feet, and I think he could win it on the ground. So I'm gonna reckon Bruno Ferreira wins this one by a finish, probably in the first 2 rounds. Vettori's got an iron chin, so that's something to be of note. You may want to throw a little chalk on the submission. You could probably get it at really good odds if you want to hit that as a straight. But, I'm going to roll with that. I think I'm going to try not to think too hardly into this. Vettori on a tough run. Ferreira has been a killer recently, so I'm going to lean with one of my favorite fighters in the UFC to win this one by finish. Moving on to the next fight, we have got... Oh, I think I skipped one. Nope. Fares Ziem versus Nazim Sadikov. This is one of the fights I'm most excited about on this card. Sadikov is coming off of one of the fights of the year against Nicholas Mata, where he ate about a 40-punch combo against Mata and then bounced back with an absolutely disgusting knockout win, where I believe both fighters were given fight of the night and a performance bonus. I think it was some sort of double bonus. I know both guys got paid really handsomely by Dana in that fight. Before that, had a big knockout win against Ismail Bonfim, won by doctor stoppage. Then he had a majority draw with Borshev. That's not a good look for sure. Borshev is, I think, 8-7 now. This was 2 years ago now. To point that out, but Borshev just lost. I think it was 2 weekends ago, maybe 3 weekends ago now. And he's 8-7 now in his career, so obviously that's a fight that you want to go back and have as a win. But before that, had a KO win over Evan Elder and a submission win over Terrence McKinney. McKinney's a tough guy to put out. Well, I shouldn't say that. I mean, yes, McKinney's been finished a lot, but he's a massive threat when he's in the octagon with you. So that's definitely a good win. Last 4 fights on a 4-0-1 streak. Then you're looking at Ziem on the other side of the octagon here. Ziem's 5-0 in his last 5 fights. He's coming in this fight as the favorite, which is interesting to me. He has won 4 of his last 5 by decision, and he has 1 KO, which was a Matt Frevola KO, where Frevola sort of leaned in. I don't know if it was a takedown shot. I don't know what he was doing, but he kind of put his head down and ate a pretty vicious knee to the face. And that made a bunch of memes for Frevola's coach, Ray something. I'm forgetting his name right now, but there's like a meme in the corner where Frevola's coach is just kind of covering his face, and that's become a gif around the MMA community. But Ziem's one of those guys that does just about everything right. Trains at Kill Cliff, so he's around guys like Shavkat Rakhmonov, Ilya Taporia, Ian Gary. So, obviously, he's a lightweight, so maybe getting some sparring in there with Ilya, who knows? They're usually pretty quiet about their training partners unless they're getting matched up and stuff like that. So, when you're training at Kill Cliff, there's a lot of talent around you. So, you can pick up a lot from being in that gym. With that being said, I do think Sadikov can win this one. He is coming off of a momentum shifting fight for his career. That was one of the best fights of the year. I think it won Fight of the Month in the UFC, and that was UFC Azerbaijan that he was fighting at. So he did win that at home, which is another thing to say. He's definitely hyped up, pumped going into this fight. And I think the Tapology community agrees with me here. They're siding on the side of Sadikov, 58% to 42% on ZM, despite ZM being a minus 140 favorite. I've seen Sadikov anywhere from plus 105 to plus 120, and I love that value. So, this is going to be a tough fight for him. I don't know if he can finish this fight. I do feel like that is probably his best path to victory, is sort of going balls to the wall, dropping any regard for his own health and just going out there trying to get a pretty vicious finish win against ZM. Because if you let ZM, try to point fight you, he's going to probably be able to get that wrestling going, get that jab going, and, maybe shake one out on the scorecards. So if you like Sadikov, I reckon you could probably take him to win by finish. But if you're leaning on the side of ZM, I'd probably take ZM by decision. I don't see Sadikov getting finished, especially after the heart that he showed against Nicholas Mata. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this one. That's going to be an interesting fight. One of the most excited ones that I am probably, like, I'd say top 3 most excited for that fight this weekend. Moving on, we have Macy Barber versus Karine Silva. This will be an interesting one. I'm not going to break this one down too much, just because nobody really wants to listen to that. But Karine Silva trains with the Fighting Nerds. Does this mean she's Carlos Prates or Gene Silva? No, it does not. She's looked pretty bad in her last 2 fights. She's coming off a unanimous decision win against Dione Barbosa. Me and all my friends definitely think she lost that fight. Like, I remember watching that, and yeah, that was 3 months ago. I can remember watching that and being like, yeah, that was definitely a fight that she just lost. Like, she should not have won that on the scorecards. And she won it by unanimous decision. I'm pretty sure all 3 judges scored it 29-28. I remember watching that and being like, yeah, she definitely lost that. And then, a year ago, she had a decision loss to Vivian Araujo. She is 4-1 in her last 5. But, yeah, those last 2 performances, not great. 1-1 in the last 2, but I do think she should be 0-2. Macy Barber, definitely some controversy around her. 5-0 in her last 5 fights in the UFC. She's 14-2 overall. Obviously, the big controversy surrounding her was she had, I believe, a seizure in her last fight that was scheduled against Erin Blanchfield, and she pulled out like right before Octagon walks. And Blanchfield was sort of bitching about that for a while. It'll be interesting to see what Barber can do. She can bounce back in here and get a nice win. She's fairly inactive. She's only fought 5 times over the last 3 years and 7 months, which, I guess that's not as inactive as other fighters, but it's been a year and 8 months since her last fight, and it was a unanimous decision against Sermonara, and then before that had a KO against Amanda Ribas, and a split decision win over Andrea Lee. Hasn't had the best competition in her career so far, but she's younger, on a better win streak, definitely the bigger prospect, and somebody that I think the UFC wants to see win. So if I had to pick somebody in this fight, I would go Macy Barber to win by decision. Will I be betting on this fight? No, I will not be betting on this fight, but that is what I'm leaning, and I'm going to keep it at that. So let me see. Sorry, moving on to the next fight on the prelims. We've got Terrence McKinney versus Chris Duncan, which is a banger. The opposite of Macy Barber versus Karine Silva. Chris Duncan coming off of a nasty win over Mateusz Rebecki. Rebecki he's a tricky customer. He's a tough guy to fight. And that was a violent war between former training partners, where Duncan was able to pull out a unanimous decision win. I did bet on Rebecca in that fight, I will say. But that was one of those fights where you watch and you didn't feel like your guy won. You know, you don't feel like you were robbed. You definitely felt like Chris Duncan shook that one out. Then on the other side, you have Terrence T-Rex McKinney, who is one of the most notorious killers in the UFC. Obviously a big social media presence on Instagram, TikTok, and all that stuff. Very active with fans. Interacts with a lot of people. I know he's liked some of my comments on his posts. So, yeah, he's a cool guy. First knockout win I actually ever saw in person was he was on the bad end of the stick, but I was at UFC St. Louis, and the first fight that I saw actually while I was there was his head kick loss against Esteban Ribovic, which has aged pretty well. You know, Ribovic is looking like probably one of the best. I'd say I put him in the top 3 best prospects at 155 pounds right now. So, you know, not a bad loss. Ribovic is a killer. I can remember that like it was yesterday. That was definitely one of my favorite experiences in, you know, my time as a UFC fan. Since then, he's coming off of back-to-back first-round wins against Damir Hadzovic and a submission win over Vyacheslav Borshev in his last fight. You know, Duncan's been in there against some killers over his last couple fights. You know, Rebecca obviously had that loss to Manuel Torres, who will be fighting on this card as well. But you know, I'm just gonna look at this one from the perspective of, you know, momentum. I think Duncan's building off some crazy momentum here, coming off of a really nasty win against Rebecca, who is probably one of the other best, you know, prospects at 155 pounds right now. I would consider Duncan one of the best prospects at 155 right now. You know, something about just that Scottish mentality. He goes in there sort of, you know, we've all seen his Contender Series win where he gets rocked about 10 times and still is able to come back and get a pretty nasty KO win, flatline KO win. So, you know, that's something that stuck with me for a while. You know, I did bet against Duncan in his last fight. I'm not going to make that, you know, that mistake here again. I'm going to lean with Duncan to win this one. I think he's going to win this one by KO. You know, McKinney is the type of guy who is going to come at you and want to get that thing done in the first 5 minutes. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm pretty sure, you know, McKinney's 17-7. I think over 20 of his fights have been finished in the first round, whether they're a finish by him or he gets finished in the first round. So, you know, this fight to end in the first round, probably a pretty good bet to take, especially if you like, you know, Terrence McKinney, because he's the type of guy who's going to go out there and, you know, want to push it, balls to the walls for 5 minutes. So, yeah, that's probably best bet to take. You know, this is a tough one. McKinney could get a finish win, but, you know, because obviously he's got a bunch of power, good jiu-jitsu. But Duncan, on the other hand, man, he's just one of those guys. I don't see him getting put out by McKinney. And so, you know, if he can drag McKinney into deep waters, he could definitely win this one by decision. If this goes past the first round, I feel like Duncan is 100% going to shake this one out. But if you like the fight, you know, to end by finish, I would probably take the fight to end by finish in the first round. Aside from that, I'm going to lean towards Chris Duncan money line. I feel like there's very good value in a minus 180 favorite there. So yeah, I'm going to lean with that and move on to the next fight. Up the card, we have the featured prelim, which is Grant Dawson versus Manuel Torres. This is going to be a very interesting fight. Torres, another one of those guys that has just got crazy power, crazy jiu-jitsu, 4-1 in his last 5s. His only loss was, you know, Ignacio Bahamondes getting a pretty nasty finish. I think that was at Noche. That was a really good fight. And he is coming off of a KO win against Drew Dober, where Dober sort of held on to his leg and got hammer-fisted about 20 times. Grant Dawson, on the other hand, you know, he's also 4-1 in his last 5. He is 3-0 in his last 3 fights with decision win over Diego Ferreira, who is a really tricky opponent in his last fight. Knockout over Ralph Garcia, and a decision win over Joe Selecki. Dawson is one of those guys that has had sort of a late career like resurgence. He's just a little bit older than Torres. And he is, only 31, about to turn 32. But he has definitely been one of those guys that seems like he's improved with time. I mean, the wrestling, it's next level. He's got absolutely nasty wrestling. Great, top position. Is able to hold you down and keep you there for a long time. I'm leaning towards Dawson to win this one. It's tough because Torres is obviously a certified killer. He's the type of guy who's going to go out there and give it his all. But I do think that the wrestling can be a bit of an issue for Torres at times. And I think that Dawson is going to be able to expose that. So if Torres can't get the KO in the first round, I think Dawson's going to be able to drag him, keep him up against the cage, get him down to the mat, and keep him there for as long as possible. And I reckon Grant Dawson will win this one by decision. And I'm going to try not to overthink that one too much. Yeah, I'm going to lean with Dawson moneyline or Dawson by decision if you like that as a straight. Moving on to the main card opener, we got Jan Blachowicz versus Bogdan Guskov. This is an interesting fight. Jan is almost 43 years old. He's one of the top 3 oldest fighters in the UFC. I think the only fighter that's older than him in the UFC right now is Wonderboy. Guskov, on the other hand, 4-0 in his last 4 fights. Coming off a really nasty finish win against Nikita Krylov, where, we all saw that, and that was pretty disgusting. Hit him with, I think it was like a little check right, straight right type of thing, and then just whacked him. Blachowicz, on the other end, he is 0-2-1 in his last 3 fights. Had, almost 3 years ago now, that draw against Magomed Ankalaev, which has aged well considering Ankalaev did end up becoming the champion. And then controversial split decision loss to Alex Pereira. A lot of people think that UFC was trying to build up Pereira at the time, and that's the reason they gave him that win. It's a close fight if you go back and watch it. I reckon you could score it for either guy, so I do respect the split decision win for Pereira. Obviously, Pereira went on to become the biggest, probably, name in the sport at the time. As of today, he's probably the biggest name in the sport. So, that was definitely a necessary win for Pereira's career moving forward. Then he took a long gap, came back 8 months ago, lost a unanimous decision against Carlos Ulberg, who is now the number 1 contender, and could likely be in line for a title shot or a number 1 contender fight against Yuri Prochazka here soon. Jan's been facing the best of the best over his last 3. Literally, the 3 fighters who he has lost or had a draw with in his last 3 fights are probably the 3 best light heavyweights in the world right now, aside from Yuri Prochazka. So it's going to be interesting. I just think this is one of those fights where the age is going to show here. That last fight for Jan against Ulberg, he was flat-footed for a lot of the fight. Just didn't look like himself. Long gap in between the Pereira fight and that Ulberg fight. And then now it's coming up on 9 months since that Ulberg fight. I reckon this could be one of the last times we see Jan in the octagon. Could he bounce back? Show us, levels to this game, expose Guskov in the brightest lights of his career? Sure he could. Jan he's one of the greatest light heavyweights of all time in the UFC. And I respect him, and I respect people who are going to pick him in this fight. But personally, I don't think I can. I'm going to have to lean towards Guskov, especially if I can. It's saying here that Guskov is the plus 110 underdog. Let me check on some other fights websites coming up here. Wow, okay, so it's got no odds for 323 right now on this website. That's interesting. I feel like I've seen over the past week, Jan as the underdog on some books. If I can get Guskov as an underdog, definitely going to take him. Just younger, on a nice win streak. Three KOs in his last 4 fights and a submission win. He's on a nice run. I think he could impress with, the biggest win of his career here this weekend. So I'm going to lean towards Guskov to get this one done. Probably just going to take it straight on the money line because he did win a submission win against Elikana, which was probably a crazy payout. I think that must have been plus 1,500 odds at least. So, maybe he pulls one out of his bag. Maybe he drops Blachowicz and, submits him on the ground after he drops him. But who knows? This is one of those ones that's really close and is going to be really interesting. But I'm definitely going to lean with the younger fighter who's is moving off a lot of momentum right now, and I'm going to lean with Guskov. Moving up the fight, we've got Henry Cejudo versus Peyton Talbot. This is one of those random matchmaking events in the UFC where it doesn't really make much sense, but it's going to be fun. This is Cejudo's retirement fight. He just confirmed that a couple days ago. And retirement fights don't really go well in the UFC. I personally like Triple C. He gets a lot of shit from the entire MMA community just because he's crazy good at rage baiting. He knows what to do. His podcasts with Kamaru Usman always end up getting clipped, and he's saying some pretty outlandish and wild things. I usually like it. I can see through him. I know he's not really serious half the time. He's honestly a pretty funny guy in my opinion. Obviously coming off that controversial eye poke loss, decision loss to Song Yadong. Song Yadong's now going to take on Sean O'Malley. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. If Cejudo would have won that fight against Yadong, who knows what he'd be doing now, because just 2 fights ago he lost to Merab, who was the champion, didn't get finished, got picked up, put over Merab's shoulder and carried around the octagon like he was a baby. But with that being said, didn't get finished by Merab, who's arguably the most dominant fighter in the entire UFC right now. And that was just 2 fights ago, just a year and 9 months ago. And Merab is, it's crazy that was only a year and 9 months ago, considering the run that Merab has been on over the last, year and a half. This is going to be interesting. Talbot was able to show a bit of an improvement in the wrestling and jiu-jitsu department in that win over Felipe Lima. I picked Lima in that fight. I thought Lima was going to be able to do the same thing that Barcelos did to Talbot, but he didn't. He wasn't able to hold him down. Talbot was able to, do a lot of damage on the feet. He won that fight via damage, I think 100%. And I just see him doing the same thing here, to be honest with you. If Cejudo is able to get the wrestling going and can get Talbot down, it's going to be interesting. If he can get Talbot down in the first round, who knows what we'll see, because we could see Cejudo do exactly what Barcelos did to Talbot. We could see Cejudo, at the end of the day, Cejudo is an Olympic gold medal wrestler and a 2-division champion in the UFC. Respect him or not, this is a guy who has won belts at 125 and 135 pounds, has wrestled at the highest stake in the world and won the gold medal. So this is going to be really interesting because if Cejudo can get him down, he'll probably be able to do what Barcelos did to him. But I just don't know if Cejudo still got it at this point. The interviews I've been seeing with him this week have been a little alarming. Him talking about how, he doesn't really care about the outcome. He's just sort of in there to show that he doesn't quit and stuff like that. That's something that usually tells me, a guy is prepared for anything that's going to happen when he gets in there. Talbot's young. They both have trained together in Reno. I remember seeing a lot of videos of them running on the mountains together and stuff like that. I haven't seen them hitting any pads or anything like that together. But they've both said that they've trained with each other. They both have a lot of respect for each other. It's going to be interesting, but I'm going to lean with Talbot here. Talbot's going to be way bigger in this fight. He's got a 6-inch height advantage. And I think, here, it should say it here. Yeah, he's going to be 6 inches taller than him, and he's got a 2.5-inch reach advantage on him. So Cejudo's actually got pretty long arms for 5'4". But yeah, it'll be interesting. If Triple C can get him down and hold him down, he could win the fight. But I'm going to lean with Talbot. I'm definitely going to go really light on this one. Talbot, close to minus 300. I don't see much value there, especially considering he got, pretty badly exposed by Barcelos in the wrestling department a couple fights ago. So we will see. I'm going to lean with Talbot, but should be interesting. Cejudo could pull off a surpriser in this one. Moving up to the next one, featured fight on the main card, we've got Brandon Moreno, the Assassin Baby, versus Tatsuro Taira. this is probably one of the hardest fights to predict on the entire card. Looks like Tapology audience is leaning towards Moreno. Right now, in my heart, I'm feeling like Tatsuro Taira is going to get this one done. I saw an edit this past week saying, Tatsuro Taira likes to beat Mexican fighters. He did blow out Alex Perez's knee. Carlos Hernandez and Edgar Chairez is a 3-fight win streak for him. So, the Hispanic fighters haven't fared well against Taira. With that being said, the Assassin Baby is a different story. Coming off of 2 nice wins against Steve Erceg and Amir Albatsi. I don't know how I aged the Erceg win right now. Erceg's one of those guys where I'm just as confused as the next guy about Erceg, because obviously he goes out there and gives Pantoja one of his hardest fights in the UFC so far, if not his hardest fight in the UFC so far. And then now he's on this sort of bad run where he almost lost to Ode Osborne in his last fight on short notice. I think he probably would have lost to Park if that fight would have happened, especially at this point, with that Osborne performance. He got walked down by Moreno. Moreno did everything right in that fight. He just schooled Erceg, was able to get him down, hold him down. And he looked great on the feet, too. This is going to be an interesting one, though. Taira's only loss really is a really, really razor-thin main event fight against Brandon Royval, which is one of my favorite fights of all time. I love Brandon Royval. I'm a huge Raw Dog fan. I bet on Royval in that fight, but that fight was razor thin. Taira showed that he belongs with the best in the world, and obviously he's coming off of that nasty win over Ha-Sung Park. This is going to be interesting. I understand the argument for both sides here. I'm probably going to stay away from this one on the betting. I think I'm just going to watch this one as a fan, to be honest with you. I'm leaning towards Taira. My heart's saying Moreno, but my head's saying Taira. So I'm going to try not to think into this one too hard. MMA community is going to be taking Moreno because obviously seasoned veteran, tons of fans. Taira I think he kind of gets shit on a decent bit. I don't think a lot of people really like him much as a fighter. So it's going to be interesting, but I'm going to lean Taira in this fight. I think the betting odds, him being a favorite is something that makes sense to me for sure, and it's going to be interesting. So I'm going to lean with Taira, and we're going to move on to the co-main event, which is a fun one. We've got Alexandre Pantoja versus Joshua Vaughn. This is one of those fights where, it's old school versus new school, and we're going to see. We're definitely going to see. I'm going to take Pantoja in this fight. I don't see a way that Joshua Vaughn beats him this weekend. With that being said, I love Joshua Vaughn as a fighter. He's super fun, and his time will come. This man will be the champion of the UFC 125-pound division someday. I could even see this guy moving up and winning the 135-pound belt one day when Merab is long gone and out of the sport. With that being said, this weekend, I don't see him being able to do anything against Pantoja. Pantoja is going to show big levels to this game. I think he's going to be able to take Vaughn down quickly, hold him down, and get a submission while he's on the ground. I feel very confident in Pantoja this weekend. Pantoja's never done me wrong. I think he's, at this point, making a run to be the best flyweight of all time. Mighty Mouse is still the GOAT as of now. But, Pantoja can keep this up, get a nice win against Vaughn, and he can, potentially earn himself a super fight against Merab, or maybe do, 1 or 2 more title defenses after this and retire as the champion. I think you can make the argument that Pantoja is the best 125-pound fighter of all time. The competition that he's facing, it's a different level. It's seriously, it's next level. I mean, obviously, Kai Kara-France, probably a pretty undeserved title shot, to be honest with you. But he ran through him really easily. He made that fight look easy. And then before that, Kaya Sakura subbed him, made it look easy. Erceg, that was a tough fight, but nobody really knew much about Erceg at the time. He came over, earned that title shot out of nowhere. It was a tough fight. Usyk is technical. He's got great power on the feet for 125 pounds. But, Pantoja was still able to do enough to get it done. And then obviously, had the wins against Brandon Royval and Brandon Moreno, who are, in my opinion, two of the best flyweights of the last decade. And they've sort of proven that. Vaughn is on a nice run here. Yes, he's coming off a big win against Brandon Royval. Fight was a lot closer than people think. I think that, if Vaughn didn't drop Royval with 15 seconds left in that final round, one of the judges may have scored that fight for Royval. One of those judges may have given the that third round to Royval, and we may be looking at a split decision, but didn't happen. He did drop Royval, and he did win that fight by unanimous decision. He's on a nasty run. Obviously, has that one loss to Charles Johnson, but who doesn't Charles Johnson beat, right? I mean, the dude's the prospect killer. He's beat just about everybody that has a name around them at 125 pounds over the last 3 years. So this is going to be an interesting one. Vaughn will be back, but this weekend is not going to be it for him. I know a lot of people are going to be on Vaughn's side. Really, the Typology community is only on 22% on Vaughn right now. Looks like most of them are 44% are leaning by Vaughn by KO, and then 54% are leaning on a Vaughn by decision. If this fight goes 5 rounds, there is not a chance in hell that Joshua Vaughn wins. I'm just going to put that out there right now. There is literally not a chance in hell. He will get dragged into deep waters if this goes 5 rounds. If he can find a way to not get submitted by Pantoja, I'd consider that a win. I think Pantoja's going to run through him this weekend, though. I think Joshua Vaughn is great. I think he earned this title shot with the win over Brandon Royval. Do I think he's the number 1 contender at 125 pounds right now? I don't know if I do. So I'm going to lean with Pantoja, and we're going to move on to the main event, which is a fun one, the one you've all been waiting for. It's Merab Dvalishvili versus Peter Yan 2. This is another one where, I could sit here and break this down for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, but I'm just not going to. Merab is he's going to win this fight. He's going to win this fight probably 50-45. He's on one of the most dominant runs in UFC history right now. Just absolutely nasty. The wins he's had since he won the belt against O'Malley, beating Umar, who was an undefeated prospect at the time, then coming back, submitting Sean O'Malley, which came out of nowhere. Nobody saw that happen. North-South choke, too, which is a pretty rare choke. Just a nasty finish. And then, obviously, that last fight against Corey Sandhagen. I'm a big Corey Sandhagen guy. I was rooting for Sandhagen in that fight. Corey stood no chance from the jump. And I just think it's going to be the same case here with Peter Yan. Peter Yan's already lost to Merab in the past. Yes, he's on a nice little win streak he's put together now with wins over Marcus McGee, Davison Figueiredo, and Song Yadong. But, before that, had losses to Merab and Sean O'Malley, which, everybody knows that's one of the most notorious robberies in UFC history. Most people think that Yan won that fight, myself included. But Sean was one of those names that they just had to build up, like we mentioned with, Pereira and Yan earlier. It was just, one of those guys who had the potential to be a big star in the UFC, and they had to give him his opportunity. Not saying that, judging is rigged in the UFC, but we've definitely seen some questionable judging over the last couple years. I do love Peter Yan. I have a lot of respect for him. This is a guy that, I know I've said this a couple times throughout this video, but this is a guy who does everything right? He's, I think in that last, fight against Merab, he stuffed like 30-something takedowns. But Merab's just relentless. He's relentless. They call him the machine for a reason. He just runs through people. He's got this gas tank that it's robotic. It's next level. It's not something that has ever been seen in UFC history, in my opinion. And I just think this is going to be another one of those fights where we see him just pushing it all to the max, showing that gas tank, shooting takedown after takedown after takedown. I think he's going to be less inclined to do striking like he did against Sandhagen. I mean, Sandhagen's like a notorious striker. So I think he wanted to stand and strike with Sandhagen a little bit more than he would usually be comfortable with, because he just wanted to prove to people that he could do it with Corey Sandhagen. He did get rocked there at the end of the 5th round. He said it himself when he was talking to Sandhagen after the fight. He was saying, you really got me there towards the end. Like, if that fight would have went one more round, who knows what would have happened. But I think we all know what would have happened. Merab would have gotten a takedown and been able to hold him down for 2 minutes to 4 minutes of the round. So yeah, I'm going to lean with the machine here. I think he's going to get this one done by unanimous decision. With that being said, I'm going to give my bets of the week. I'm going to place 2 bets this week. I'm going to go with a 2-legger of Merab Dvalishvili by decision and Alexandre Pantoja by submission or decision, double chance. I don't know exactly what the odds on that are going to be, but I'll float that up on the screen when I get the opportunity to. And then my other parlay for this week, I have a $25 parlay going, a 6-legger, where I am going with Iwo Baranowski, Bruno Ferreira, Nazim Sadikov, Chris Duncan, Grant Dawson, and Alexandre Pantoja. I think that was 6, right? Pantoja, Dawson, Duncan, Sadikov, Ferreira, Baranowski. I think it's a bonus bet that I had, $25 I put on it. That should win you about $550. Those are my favorite picks for this week. So I'm going to lean with that. At the end of future episodes going forward, I'm going to try to drop at least 1 or 2 of my favorite bets of the week for you guys. With that being said, we have a let me check. I think we have a fight night next week. We have got Royval versus Cap, which will be a banger. 2 of my favorite 125-pound fighters. So I'll have a video out next week breaking this down. Then after that, we're going to be on a long gap. I think we've got 6 weeks between then and UFC 324, which will be the first fight on Paramount, which will be very exciting. In the meantime, I'll try to get some content out. Going to reach out to some fighters from St. Louis. Maybe try to get an interview. Obviously, just starting my page, though, so don't really have any subscribers or anybody like that. But, I look forward to doing this. I love MMA. And, it's been a big passion of mine for the last couple years. So, I'm going to give this a shot. I hope that you guys enjoy this. I'll be back next week with another episode. And then we'll see where it goes from then. So, thank you all for watching. And I hope you have a great day.